Is up, Maniacs? I am Zach, and I am the Milly Maker Maniac. Welcome to our Week 2 breakdown. This will be a little bit of an abbreviated version. Fortunately, had a death in the family this past week, so my regular schedule got thrown off quite a bit. So this will be a little bit shorter version than most weeks, but we still wanted to get you guys some information on what I'm looking at this week. So let's go ahead and just jump right into it. This is the spreadsheet that I build each week where I look at the grades between the different matchups and see where, according to the grades, where there are some matchup advantages. So got it broken down by game over here. I'm always looking at the Vegas odds to start the week. This is just kind of a good starting point. It's not the end-all be-all, but if Vegas thinks a team is going to score a lot of points, it's generally a good place to start. Obviously, week in and week out, teams are going to hit the over, teams are going to hit the under. We are looking for teams that are going to have that outlier outcome on hitting that over and hitting that over pretty substantially. Last week, week 1 was a bit of a weird week. We had 12 games during the main slate. 11 of those games hit the under, and the only game that hit the over was the Jets and Steelers, which was the lowest point total. Very low rostered percentages on that whole game. But just a bit of a weird week in week 1. Generally speaking, the offenses are going to tend to lag behind the defenses early on in the season, so it's not that surprising, but it was definitely an abnormal week. So we jump in here. I'll just go ahead and pull up the implied team totals. And I pulled these earlier in the week, so these do move from where I have it in the spreadsheet. But really, to me, like if this is 26 points or 29 points, that's pretty much the same as far as like how I'm treating it. Again, this isn't the end all be all, so I don't need the exact number here. I just need to get a feel for where Vegas thinks a lot of points are going to be scored. So they have Baltimore with the most points. You're going to see that I'm actually fading Baltimore quite a bit this week. I think that they kind of had an outlier outcome playing against the Bills in a shootout last week. And I think the Browns are actually a pretty solid defense. I don't think they're going to need to score nearly as many points as they did last week. So I think this is actually pretty likely to hit the under. So I am fading Baltimore pretty extensively this week. Cincy looking for a big bounce back from a slow first week. They obviously led down all of his DFSers last week, but they played Jacksonville, which is a much better matchup than Cleveland. And I think they are likely to bounce back, although we'll see their grades don't look very good from last week. But when we're looking at these grades, we have to consider that this is only 1 week as well. And matchups make a huge difference. Like you're not going to grade as well against a tough matchup as you are against an easy matchup. So we'll consider all those things when we're looking through all this. But see, Detroit, Dallas, Arizona, Buffalo, San Francisco, Rams, Philly, KC, those are the top ends of the implied team totals. Now, let's look at our overall grades here. So this is the grades so this is the Rams are playing the Titans. So it took their overall grade minus the Tennessee's overall grade. You can see that they're the exact opposite of a negative 23 on the grade, and the Rams is a 23. So this is an indication that they're the most likely team to win this week, just based on the matchups. But we're not necessarily looking for which team's going to win when we're looking at DFS. We're looking at the team that's most likely to score the most points. So I actually don't care too much about this overall number. What I care a lot more about is this offensive versus defensive matchup here. And interestingly enough, when we look at the matchups, the offense versus the defense, the Jets have the highest advantage according to the grades. I will be playing a ton of this Jets-Bills game. Now, when we look at, again, we want to put this all in context. We looked at 1 week last week, and they played Pittsburgh, and they had a shootout against Pittsburgh, which basically nobody saw coming, right? But I think we can all agree that it's unlikely that Pittsburgh is going to be a bad defense. They had a rough week, but to me, it's a pretty good indication that the Jets are going to be somewhat substantial in offense. I also love that with the Jets, really, it's pretty concentrated. You can pretty much play Justin Fields, Garrett Wilson, and Breece Hall. You can mix in a little Braylon Allen, and he might get some goal line work. But it's pretty much those three. So you can build single stacks or double stacks with those three guys pretty easily. And yeah, so I like that spot a lot this week. And another thing you'll see here is Buffalo also has an advantage over the Jets D. The Jets D, I don't think is bad. They had a tough week last week, but I think they're going to, as the year goes on, they're going to show to be probably better than average defense. But when it's Josh Allen, it doesn't really matter who you're playing. And I think all these grades that they have from last week, they played a good defense. The Ravens defense is a good defense. So I just think this is setting up for two offenses that are going to be solid against two defenses that have struggled, and you have Josh Allen in the mix. So I love that game. I'll be playing a ton of that game, be way above the field on that game. And the Jets only have a 19.5 point total, even though they have the according to the grades, the biggest offense versus defense advantage. I thought Justin Fields played great last week. He probably played better than his average game will be, but he's going to have a low floor, and he's got that boom game ceiling. It feels like he's playing with confidence. It feels like Aaron Glenn is instilling that confidence in him. I want to ride that wave and see where it goes, especially in a game that if it gets into a shootout, both these quarterbacks could put up huge numbers, both their legs and through the air. So that's the one that jumps out. Philly has a huge advantage against KC. KC got their butts kicked by the Chargers last week. I think the Chargers are going to be very good. So, that's somewhat skewed, but I think Philadelphia is obviously is very good. They're the Super Bowl champs, but they have huge advantages across the board here. So we'll be playing some Jalen Hurts stacks. With another nice thing about Philadelphia, just like the Jets, is their touch and target concentrate volume is very concentrated. There's basically 4 players that you'll have in your mix there, especially with Goddard out. You would have Hurts and Barkley, A.J. Brown, and Devontae Smith, obviously, so they're easy to build. I'm actually out on the Chiefs this year in general, so I might do like a single bring back in a lot of those stacks, but I'm primarily just going to be focusing on the Philly side of that and then getting some other game stacks brought into those lineups. Then we have New England with a big advantage against Miami's defense. I think Miami I think Miami is the worst team in the league this year. And Drake May got off to a tough start last week, but I think he bounces back this week and has a big week. He's one of my core QBs this week. Dallas, I love this matchup. Now, the one reason this number isn't a lot bigger is because the pass rush, you can see this pass blocking versus pass rush discrepancy here. They're minus 24 because the Giants' pass rush is tough. But that being said, so was Philly's, and that's who Dallas played last week. Dak played really well. If it wasn't for the drops from CeeDee Lamb, his numbers would have looked a lot better. Dak is another one of my core plays this week. Easy to stack with CD and Pickens. We're going to have a lot of those lineups. And then you can bring it back with Malik. I have quite a few lineups where I have 4 spots taken up with Dak, CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens, and the Malik Neighbors bring back, and then we can build other game stacks from there, but I like that core on a lot of my tournament lineups. The Rams have a slight advantage. We're not really going to touch them. It's just a lower. I think it's 2 good defenses. The Rams are going to be my number 1 defense. We'll go ahead and pull over here. You can see for what I found when I do this is the difference in the grades. The biggest indicator of success for a defense scoring points is their pass rush, and they have a massive advantage against Tennessee's O-line there. So they will be my number 1 defense by far. Giants will mix in there a lot as well, but as I said, they actually don't have an advantage overall defense versus offense because their secondary is just so putrid. So I think they could get some turnovers. They might get a couple sacks, but I think they're going to give up a lot of points, so I'm not getting much of them. My cheap defense that I'm punting on is actually Tennessee in that same game. I'm rooting for this Rams-Tennessee game to be a 10-7 type game. But they have an advantage on the pass rush side. Their secondary is not great, so their overall defense versus offense overall isn't great. But that pass rush at 2,400, I'll be mixing them in quite a bit. Baltimore is really solid, but they're just too expensive. I'm not really going to get to them. All right, let's go back over here, back over to our offense versus defense. So these are our core plays. Going to get Buffalo mixed in there. And we'll get these are going to be my core plays though for the offenses that I'm chasing this week. The Jets, Eagles, Patriots, Cowboys, and Buffalo are my go-to plays. And then we'll mix in, I'm going to get some Detroit in there. They have one of the higher point totals. So we'll mix them in as well, even though they don't have great grading from last week, but they had a tough week last week. I think it's a better matchup this week against the Bears than it was last week against the Packers. I think the Packers might be the best defense or one of the best defenses in the league, and they just ran into a tough matchup in week one. So let's move on to the player pool over here. That was not the right one. Here we go. Over here. So let's jump into QBs. So my core QB plays, QBs I love this week. Josh Allen at 7,100, way too cheap. Against the Jets that we're just in a shootout and I think are going to be able to score a lot of points against their defense. In games which the Bills give up a lot of points, Josh Allen goes off just like he did last week. So definitely going to have a lot of Josh Allen. One of the nice things that we saw last week with the Bills is their target concentration was a lot more concentrated than it was last year. Basically, you had 3 guys running routes at receiver. You had Joshua Palmer, Khalil Shakir, and Keon Coleman. Keon Coleman had the best fantasy day. He got in the end zone, and I think he has the most upside. So we'll be mixing him in to our lineups. But you can run Josh Allen naked with the game comeback. So like I have a few lineups where I just have Josh Allen versus Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall. Let's go back to, let me actually pull up correlation charting from last year and look at a game that I think you can see Josh here had multiple QB1 weeks. Week 14 is one we're going to look at here. This is when they played, not that one actually. There it is, week 15. This is when they played the Lions and there was that huge shootout. Josh Allen was QB1, and then the Lions had 3 guys in the top 5, but there was only one other Bill that came along with him, and it was actually his running back. So I don't mind going Josh Allen naked and then actually having the comeback with the game stack there, because I think a scenario like this is likely. We can look at other weeks too. He doesn't necessarily bring people along with him. He scores 52 points and he only has one guy in the top 10 in Khalil Shakir in week 14. Let's go back to over here and see what his other top 1 weeks were. Weeks 1 and 3 last year. So looks like look at week 1. See, Josh Allen didn't bring anybody with him. So QB1, but did need to stack him. And then week 3, QB1, James Cook was running back 11. Khalil Shakir was wide receiver 18. Kincaid was top 5, so he did bring one guy along with him. But my point being is Josh Allen can generate a lot of fantasy points and doesn't necessarily bring people along with him, which is kind of a bummer because I like to be able to like have stacks in which if my quarterback goes off, I know that I can fill 3 or 4 roster spots of people that are going to be top 5 because he's bringing people along with him. But if he's QB1, we just need to be aware of like that's not really the build with Josh Allen. So we're going to do either skinny stacks where it's just him and one receiver, it's him and Coleman, him and Shakir, him and Palmer, him and Kincaid, him and Cook. Like that, those are pretty much going to be the builds that we'll build with him. But in a scenario which he is QB1, most of the time he's going to have the opponents that are going to be having big games because he's being forced to score a lot of points in order for them to win. I think it's going to be the case a lot this year that Buffalo defense just looks like it's going to be bad. So, yeah, Josh Allen and bringbacks with Breece Hall, bringbacks with Garrett Wilson, or a combination of both. I like a lot. Jalen Hurts, he is similar to Allen in that he scores a lot of rushing touchdowns, so he doesn't necessarily have to bring anybody along. So I'll run some naked Jalen Hurts stacks. I will also match him up with Saquon. If we go back to last year and we look at some of his better weeks last year, there were plenty where he brought Saquon along with him. Or I guess Saquon brought him along with him. Either way you want to look at it. Let's see. No, we had some later in the year. It's not. There we go. Yeah, so here's a week in which Jalen Hurts was QB2, Saquon Barkley was running back 1. So it doesn't necessarily have to be with the receiver. I do like the skinny stacks, especially A.J. Brown. Everybody is going to be off A.J. Brown this week. So Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Jalen Hurts, Devontae Smith, Jalen Hurts, and Saquon Barkley. Those skinny stacks I like a lot. I don't really think I'm going to do any bringbacks. They're just don't really know where the targets are going to go for the Chiefs this week with Worthy being out and Rice also being out with the suspension. So this one is with Hurts. It's a skinny stack with just him, and then we'll be looking to bring in other game stacks in to those lineups, but it'll be Hurts on his own or with one other guy for the most part. Now, Burrow is the opposite. He is a guy that if he's going to be QB1, he's bringing along a couple guys with him. So I like Burrow and Chase and Higgins, Burrow Brown Higgins, Burrow Brown Chase, Burrow Brown Gesicki. You want to mix Gesicki in there. He definitely, when Burrow goes off, tends to score some points. Let's look at some like here's a perfect example already up. Joe Burrow QB1, Chase Brown RB4, and Mike Gesicki tight end 1. So that's a combination that you're not going to see a lot of people have. Joe Burrow being QB1 without having Jamar Chase or T. Higgins in the top 10 there. That's not something that a lot of people are going to build. So this will be a combination that I'll mix in as we go through here. Next week, Joe Burrow, QB1 again. This week, a more normal one with Burrow, Chase, and Brown. He had quite the run down the stretch. So here's one. I built quite a few of these where I have Burrow, Brown, Higgins, and Chase. So a triple stack there. Burrow is an easy one to stack. If he goes off, he's bringing people with him. So I really like building stacks with Burrow. And obviously they sucked last week, but in their grades, when we go look at Cincy's grades down here, like they're towards the bottom. They're negative in pretty much every matchup grade here, which I find very interesting. We know that Cincy is a much better offense than what these grades are showing. So this is one where I kind of toss out week 1. They struggle in Cleveland in general. I think Cleveland has a much better defense than people give them credit for. And throughout the year, they're going to struggle in pass block. So I'm not going to be too worried about this because Joe Burrow can still be successful with a bad pass blocking offensive line. So even though they look really bad, everything's negative and yellow here, they are a team that we have seen a lot in the past of them going off, so we're not going to just disregard that. I'm going to pretty much have a Joe Burrow lineups every single week when we're looking at tournaments. And right now I'm talking primarily tournaments. We're looking at, this is the Milly Maker Maniac podcast. We're trying to win that Milly Maker. So these are the guys that I'm building around that I think give us the best chance of winning that Milly Maker. In order to do so, we need a QB that is really top 3 that in the main slate for us to have a chance. These are guys that I think are most likely to do that. Dak Prescott, I love this week. I talked about how the Giants' secondary is trash. I think CeeDee Lamb is going to want to bounce back after tough drops last week, but Prescott played really well last week, even though statistically it didn't show that well. He only threw for 188 yards. But if a couple of those passes that were dropped are caught, he's hovering around 100 yards and has a big week, and he kept him in those games. And he's in that game, and he's playing one of the best defenses in the league in Philadelphia last week. This week, he's going to be able to prey on that just putrid secondary in New York. So he's also easy to stack with. So I'm going to throw in some Javonte Williams. They actually ran the ball pretty well, and he was on the field a lot last week. Let's look at Dallas here. Their matchup, so their pass versus coverage, one of the biggest advantages of the week. Let's see. I think it's second best. Yeah, behind the Jets, actually. So that grade we like a lot. This is where we knew that they were going to give up some to that defensive line for the Giants and pass blocking, but the receivers are versus coverage has an advantage. Their run versus the run D has an advantage. Their run blocking versus the run D has an advantage. Really, the only place they don't is in pass rush. So I just think this sets up really well for them to have a big game. So the stacks that we'll be building with Dak are going to be Pickens and Lamb, and we'll throw in Javonte, and we'll also throw in some Jake Ferguson as well. That's those will be the core guys we'll be building around with different combinations of them. Justin Fields, I love. He's actually going to be my cash quarterback, even though he's not going to be the most owned cash quarterback. I just think he gets a lot of leverage on the field, which you aren't necessarily looking for in cash. But I would much rather go Justin Fields at 5,700 over Lamar Jackson at 7. I consider Josh Allen, but I just think there's a lot more things I can get to in my cash lineup if I put Fields in there over those guys. He has a good floor too. Like, it's very unlikely that he's going to have less than 50 yards rushing in a game like this, where it's likely to be going back and forth. So you got that floor. Really, I don't see him scoring less than 12 points. Like, that's worst case scenario. But I think him being in the 20s this week is very likely. So I like him a lot, and he's very easy to stack with. I'm going to be stacking him with the skinny stack. It's very obvious is Fields to Garrett Wilson. But I also will have some Fields and Breece Hall lineups. I'll have some Fields, Breece Hall, and Garrett Wilson all together as well. That's really all I'm doing. Like, I considered throwing in some Mason Taylor, but he just didn't get any looks last week. Josh Reynolds is out. Really, their offense is just so concentrated, and I don't think that they have anybody in Buffalo that can stop Garrett Wilson. So I don't think he's going to go away from him. There will be weeks where Garrett Wilson will have a top-end corner on him, and those are going to be tough weeks for Fields because he really doesn't have any other options. He doesn't have other looks. But this is not that week. I think he's going to have a very good week. I think I really like him to be a top 5 QB this week. I would put a decent amount of money on that for sure. And then one of the things we're going to be doing throughout the year is we'll be playing the quarterback who plays the Miami Dolphins. And this week, it is Drake May. I like Drake May. I loved him in best ball this year. He's a guy that can score some points with his legs as well. Stacking him is a little bit harder. It's cheap to build these Drake May stacks. Last week, the guy you needed was Keyshawn Butte. He's at 4,500 this week. I'll be building plenty of stacks with him. But you got Stephon Diggs. I think he's at 5,100. We'll be building stacks with him. We'll be building stacks with Hunter Henry as well. You could throw in Demario Douglas. I've done a couple of those, but not many. Those are the core guys I'm going to be building with. But Drake May is a guy that I think will end up becoming, when he has big weeks, will end up being like a Josh Allen type, in which he could either be a skinny stack or naked, and to be when he's QB1. Like, he doesn't necessarily have to bring people along. This week, though, I think that I will be doing skinny stacks with him. I won't be doing any naked lineups with him. So these are my core guys. These are the ones I'm spending the most money on in the Milly Maker. I'm using these guys in my multipliers. These are the guys that I think have pretty low floors and big upsides. These are the guys that I think have the potential of scoring that 30-plus point week, having that 30-plus point week that could lead us to that $1 million. These are guys that have upside that I'll be mixing in a little bit into my tournament lineups. And then I'll also be doing primarily using these guys in my lower end big tournaments. I mixed in at least one Milly Maker lineup with each of these guys besides Mac Jones. But Goff, I just think, is in line for a bounce back this week. They're at home. There'll be that energy with Ben Johnson coming back into town as well. And it's just a better matchup than it was last week against the Packers. They play the Bears this week. So I just like the potential of him going off. When he goes off, he brings people with him. Like, here's the great example. Week 11, Jared Goff. Amon-Ra St. Brown was wide receiver 1. Jameson Williams was wide receiver 8. Montgomery was running back 4. Gibbs was running back 9. And he was a stud in the playoffs, the fantasy playoffs last year. QB2, RB2, wide receiver 2, tight end 3. He's just very easy to stack. When he goes off, he brings people with him. QB3, running back 7, wide receiver 4, tight end 6. So because when he goes off, he brings people with him pretty much every week in DFS, I'm going to be playing him in some manner because there's always a chance he goes off. And when he does, you can fill 4 or 5 roster spots with one team or one game that gets you much closer to that $1 million by eliminating some spots you got to figure out. Trevor Lawrence sucked last week. Definitely a big disappointment, but they have a good matchup in the Cincy game. Vegas thinks that the Jag-Cincy game is going to be a shootout. I think that's likely as well. If Trevor Lawrence can play better than he did last week, it's kind of a key for both him and Burrow. So I've built some lineups with him. I think Brian Thomas Jr. has a bounce back week for sure. I like Travis Hunter getting a lot of underneath stuff. So I'll definitely mix him in. Caleb Williams obviously didn't look great in the second half last week, but when he goes off, he brings people with him as well. And if this game turns into a shootout, which is possible, I like him in like the fourth quarter comeback type scenarios. Kyler, I don't love, but I'm going to build some lineups with him. Good matchup this week for them. So they play the Panthers here. So these two I'm a little bit lower on, but I'll mix in a little bit. And then we got Mac Jones, which is your free square. I build a couple lineups with him, but primarily out of that game, I'm just going to be focused on Christian McCaffrey and Ricky Pearsall. You'll see that I don't have Lamar Jackson in there. It's not that I don't think Lamar could put up 20-plus points this week. I just think it's unlikely that he's QB1. Even if he's QB5, there's better options at pricing this week. I do think there's a chance Josh Allen is QB1 and he's a must-have and he's only $100 cheaper. I just don't see Lamar being QB1 this week. So for that reason, I am out. Purdy's out. Mahomes, he just doesn't have any weapons. I think the Chiefs just aren't going to be good this year, honestly. I think there's a decent chance they're like 2-4 in the first 6 games with all the matchups they have, but we're not worried about that. We're worried about this week. And I just think it's unlikely without any of his weapons against the super tough defense in Philadelphia. I just don't see it. So I'm out. We don't need to go through the rest of these guys, but these are my core plays. Let's move on to running back. So running back, I have a much smaller player pool. I'm pretty much building Christian McCaffrey and Breece Hall lineups in probably 60% of my lineups. Those are my 2 running backs. Travis Etienne, he is getting he's the guy now, and he looked explosive last week. He's playing against the Bengals this week, which is not a scary matchup, so I like him a lot. Travion Henderson, we're playing people against the Dolphins. Ramondre Stevenson looked awful last week. I just think they're going to get Travion the ball more. He's an explosive player. I think he busts 1 or 2 this week. I like him a lot. He's one of my core plays. Guys I like this week that I'm sprinkling in, but aren't I wouldn't say are my core plays. Jamar Gibbs, he's just too good and in a much better matchup. I think after a tough week last week, they are going to make sure to get their superstar the football and get the offense rolling. So I definitely want him in some lineups. Jonathan Taylor, he's always going to get volume every single week. He has a really tough matchup this week with the Broncos, but he's going to be very low owned. And he last year against the Broncos had a big week. That's the week that he dropped the ball at the goal line. But despite that, it was still a 20-plus point week. So he can do it against that team. And you just know he's going to get 20 to 25 touches guaranteed. And that offensive line is really solid, even though they're up against a tough opponent in the Broncos. Chase Brown, if that game's likely to be a shootout, he's a guy that can get a piece of that. So I like that. James Conner going against the Panthers. He didn't get nearly as much volume as I would have liked last week, but with that matchup, I still want him in my player pool. And James Cook, again, if he's in a shootout, which I think that it's very likely that Jets game is, he could get a touchdown or 2 in that game. So these are the guys I like. I sprinkle in. These are my core guys. Love Breece Hall. We were worried about the split there, but he got the vast majority of the carries last week, looked explosive. That Buffalo run defense is trash. I just think he has a huge opportunity to be RB1 this week. Christian McCaffrey is going to get all the volume against New Orleans. They have a ton of injuries over there. They have to get the ball to McCaffrey. It's going to be McCaffrey and Pearsall. That's all they have this week. Those are the 2 guys. I don't like playing really running backs above 7,500 or even 7K unless they're in stacks or game correlation. Derrick Henry is tempting, but I'm just not going to play him because I think if he's RB4 at 8,200, he was a bad pick. There are 3 guys that were much cheaper than him that you could have got to score more points, and I just think that's the most likely scenario. Same thing with Saquon. They're going to be solid. They're going to have solid weeks. They're probably both going to be top 10, but we're not trying to get guys that are top 10 when we're trying to win the Milly Maker. We're trying to get guys that are top 3, top 5. And at this price point, they have to be RB1 to be needed, and they have to be RB1 by a big margin to be needed. I don't think that is how this plays out this week. So because of that, I am only using them when I'm stacking that game or stacking them with their quarterbacks. Devon Achane is another one that is going to be very popular this week that I'm pretty out on. He can do it ugly, and he's one that, might be a blind spot for me that I probably should have in more lineups, but I just don't. I'm pretty much out on the Dolphins lineup. Like, I'd build a few like $3 multi-entry tournament lineups with the Dolphins, and I included Achane in all of those just in case there's that, they have that bounce back. But the vibes there just feel bad. I'm trying to fade as much as possible the Dolphins, even though Achane is a stud. I just think there's better options this week where I don't have to be hoping that the Dolphins offense is solid, because I just don't see that happening this week. Javonte is a sneaky one. I'm pretty much just playing him in the game correlation. I mix him in a little bit here and there. He's not an explosive player, but that offensive line, I think, is better than what we thought going into the season. They held their own last week. Obviously, there wasn't Jalen Carter there getting kicked out of the game early, but he showed pretty well. He's on the field a ton. I think he's going to be this year's Rico Dowdle, obviously. Same offense, but Rico Dowdle isn't a great player, but had a pretty solid fantasy season last year just because of the opportunity there in Dallas. So I think Javonte is going to have some weeks that he's useful. I think DeAndre Swift sucks, but he's the only guy they got there right now, and he's going to get volume. So if I'm saying that Lions and Bears game is a shootout, which I think is a possibility, DeAndre Swift's a guy that definitely could have a big day there, so we'll mix him in a little bit here and there as well. And Braylon Allen, obviously not getting many touches, and my big play is Breece Hall, but he could get the goal line work. He's getting the short yardage work, so he could get goal line work. So if he scores twice, he could pay off that price tag. And Chuba was real high on Chuba last week, and he did okay, but I just don't think this week against Arizona. I think Arizona's D is actually going to be pretty solid. We're going to pass on him this week. I just don't think he can be a top 5 guy this week. Fades that are scary. Kyron's probably the scariest one, but Kyron doesn't have like huge upside weeks. I was going to look back at last year, but at DraftKings is just doing, I think they're just showing last week now. Not showing last year's, yeah. Yeah, but he only had a few games over 20 points last year. Didn't really have any big top 5 performances, so although this is the best matchup of the year probably for them, I just don't think I don't think he's an explosive enough player to have a week where you have to have him, where I think these guys could have that week. All right, let's move on to wide receiver. So my general rule of thumb is I only play guys above 7K at receiver in game correlation. So I'm not really getting any Puka because I'm not playing any Rams lineups. Obviously, I think he's an incredible receiver, but he's got to be wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 1 by a substantial margin at this price to pay off. There's just a lot of value lower down in pricing that I want to get after. So I'm pretty much not going to have any Puka this week. I'm going to play a ton of Jamar Chase, a ton of CeeDee Lamb, but they're going to be in lineups with Burrow and with Dak, and Malik is going to be my comeback in a lot of those Dak stacks. I'm Ross St. Brown. I'm not really mixing him in beyond game correlation, but I'll get him here and there. But these guys, especially Brian Thomas, Garrett Wilson, T. Higgins, these guys I'm having in the majority of my lineups. A.J. Brown I'm mixing in here and there in non-Hurts lineups. Just A.J. Brown at 6,600 is just crazy cheap. He did not look good last week. He still looked hampered with the hamstring situation, but he's just such an explosive player that if he is healthier this week, he's a guy that can always go off for 150 and two touchdowns, no problem. Like, he's always capable of that. So I'm never going to have a guy like that completely out of my lineup, especially when he's at 6,600. Jackson Smith and Jigba looked like the absolute truth last week, but he does have a tough matchup this week. Who they playing? I know it's a tough matchup, but I'm not remembering off the top of my head on that one. Let's pull up our game here. Yeah. Where is Seattle? There. Oh, yeah, they play Pittsburgh. So obviously Pittsburgh did not play well on defense last week, but what they did in the second half on Garrett Wilson is they just put Jalen Ramsey on him, and that really took Wilson out of the game in that second half. And I think they're just going to start out of the gates with putting Jalen Ramsey on Jackson Smith-Njigba. So even though I think he's going to get a lot of target volume, I think it's unlikely that he has a huge week. So I'm mixing him here and there. I should probably just move him to guys I like, but we'll have a little bit of him, but not much. I'm out on Tyreek, out on Sutton, out on Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers was a stud last week, obviously wide receiver 1, but I'm just not really getting at that game. And I don't think shootout is likely. They had a really good week against Jamar Chase last week in the Browns and T. Higgins. I think it's unlikely that Zay repeats his wide receiver 1. I don't want to chase those points. I think there's just better options in this grouping compared to Zay. Sutton, he's a guy that is a tough fade as well, but he just doesn't really fit my theory on games this week. So sprinkling him in doesn't really fit what I'm doing this week. So he's a guy that could burn me, but I'm not playing. And Tyreek, again, we're pretty much fading the Dolphins, so not touching that. Now, I love this range. I am all about George Pickens. This week, I have a ton of him. I'm all about Ricky Pearsall. Jameson Williams is a guy at 5,700 that can have a boom week at any time. Travis Hunter is going to get a ton of volume. I think this week I would expect another 8 or so targets. And, against Cincy's D, he could easily break one. Keon Coleman is in that matchup that we think is going to be a boom game with the Jets, so I like him a lot there. Got other guys that I like in this range. Tedero McMillan, I think he's a very good player. They played very poorly last week. I think they bounced back a little bit, so he could have a decent week this week. I'm sprinkling him in here and there. Stephon Diggs was on the field a ton last week, not as much as we thought. I think they're just trying to ease him back in from the injury, but against the Dolphins, yeah, give me some Stephon Diggs at 5,000. Hollywood Brown got 16 targets last week after Xavier Worthy went down. I don't think he'll get that many this week, but at 5,200, he's somebody we could consider. But that defense for Philadelphia is just so damn good in the secondary that I don't really love the play. But if I'm low on salary and I need to mix him in, and I've already used a couple of these guys, I can throw him in here and there. Guys I'm not playing in this range, I'm pretty much just out on DK Metcalf throughout the year. He's going to be just an inconsistent guy. Devontae Adams, this is one I probably should have considered more, but I just think that that's unlikely that game goes off. So I'm pretty much just avoiding that game. We'll have different weeks throughout the year that we'll go after him, but I just don't think this is the week. Devontae Smith, I actually need to mix in a little bit more. I will move him over. Out on the Browns this week. Pittman had a good week last week, but he's facing Cortland Sutton, or not Cortland Sutton, Pastor Tan this week. So we're out on that. And Cooper Kupp is washed. So we're pretty much just not playing him at all this year. I'll play these guys in game correlation. Shakir, Harrison, DJ Moore, Jalen Waddle. I like Rome Odunze a lot at 4,800. He seems to be Caleb Williams' guy at 4,800. That's just underpriced. So we'll get him in there. The guys that I like in this range, Ridley, Butte. I'll mix in some Jennings. We're not sure if he's going to play. We're coming up on inactives now, so we'll see if he's going to play. If he plays, I'll mix him in a little bit. And then Joshua Palmer, we're playing in game stacks. Cheap guys, start throws that we're considering. Xavier Legette, not a great player, but he's just in a situation where he's got a lot of opportunity. Zacchaeus had quite a few targets last week. Tyquan Thornton there in KC with all the injuries at 3,600 is probably going to get somewhere in the ballpark of 5 to 6 targets. So that's at 3,600, something we have to consider. Tesla scored last week. He just had the one. He was only on the field for a few snaps. I think he only ran 3 routes, but he did get the touchdown. They said they want to get him more involved this week, so I think they will. Torrey Horton, I don't think this is probably going to be the week, but I think at some point this year he's going to have some boom-ish games. But I don't know if this necessarily will be this week. And we'll throw in some Slayton and Tolbert in some of our DAX stacks. All right, let's move on to tight end. I'm pretty much not playing the high-end guys unless it's with my quarterback. Love Hunter Henry at 4K. Like Tyler Warren, he's probably this is probably the last time he'll be at 4,500. but it's just a tough matchup against the Broncos. So I think he has like a shot of being like tight end 5. I think it's unlikely he's tight end 1 this week. I think there's some guys down in this range that could be tight end 1 or top 5, and they're much cheaper. Doing a lot of Juwan Johnson and Jake Ferguson, Kincaid when we're doing Allen lineups, Strange, and then Gesicki and our Burrow lineups. Fannin got a lot of targets last week. He's going to be my cash guy. I'm not really going after him in tournaments. And then Chig, I think, is going to be one of the main targets for Cam Ward throughout the season and today. Not playing Mark Andrews, not playing Njoku, not playing Evan Ingram. Fading those guys. All right, on defense, it's the Rams. The Rams are the go-to one. The Patriots, they're playing the Dolphins. Dolphins suck. Even though the Patriots D didn't look great last week, I just think the Dolphins are bad. So we're going to go after that. The Colts will play the Broncos this week. They looked really good against the Dolphins last week, but I think their defense is going to be all right. And Bo Nix just made a lot of bad throws last week. So I think there is some opportunity for turnovers there. Even though I love the Cowboys this week, the Giants are, with that pass rush, can always get points with sacks and creating fumbles on those plays, and maybe even if they rush if Dak feels the pressure and makes a bad throw, there's always picks in play as well. So we'll mix in the Giants. And the Titans against the Rams, they got that pass rush advantage at 2,400. They're my punt defense. Primarily, I've been in this range with mixing in the Titans when I need a cheap defense. So that is my player breakdown. Let's build a quick lineup here. Let's go with Justin Fields. I've been talking a lot about Fields, been talking about that game. Actually, let's go the Josh Allen side. And we'll do a comeback with our boy Breece Hall. I just think that game's likely to be a shootout. If it's a shootout, Josh Allen is going to carry that team and always going to have them in it, as we saw last week. So if we build a scenario in which that they have to come back in the fourth quarter, I like him scoring a lot of points. And if he's having to come back in the fourth quarter, it's likely that Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson are having big games to put them in the lead. Let's go on and get Keon Coleman. I think he's the most likely guy to have a boom week. Last week he had 28.2. So if they did what they did last week, which generally I don't want to be chasing points, but this matchup just sets up so well for both teams that I will chase a little bit this week. So we got 4 guys, 1 game. If that game goes off, I really like the setup of this. Now, let's go. I want to get a little piece of the Cowboys passing game. The cheaper version is George Pickens, so we're going to get him in there. At running back, we talked a lot about how we just don't believe in Miami at all. I think Travion Henderson, I think this is his coming out party this week. We are going to mix him in there. Breece Hall, Travion Henderson, Garrett Wilson, Keon Coleman, George Pickens. All right, let's go to tight end. We're just going to go. Let's go here. Let's go Brenton Strange. And then defense, we're going to go Rams. He's at 7,100. Perfect. That's what I was hoping for. We get our comeback with our Pickens here with Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors going to get like 15 targets every week as long as he's healthy. Much better matchup than what they had last week. I think they will find ways to get the ball to Malik and have a better week. Russ sucked last week, but I think he knows he needs to get the ball to Malik. He's going to find a way to do that. I think Malik bounces back with a much better week this week. So here it is. Here is our winning lineup. This is a single entry. I maxed out my Milly Maker earlier in the week, so I just wanted to do a lineup for you guys. But single entry, $5 tournament here. This is the winning lineup. All right, thanks for tuning in, Milly Maker. Smash that subscribe button. Good luck today, and we will see you next week.